Welcome back to this episode of the OT Flourish podcast. I'm your host, Mandy Chamberlain. Today, we're diving into goal writing, something every OT needs to feel confident with. And so I'm excited to share that my Mastering OT Goal Writing, the Ultimate Guide and Goal Bank for Adult Rehab ebook is launching next week. So make sure you be on the lookout for that if you're looking for extra support. And just a quick reminder before we get started, for green and gold OT Accelerator members, don't forget that you can listen to this podcast, log in, and grab a CEU. Okay, I'm excited for this topic because this is a topic I am actually passionate about. I don't know any other people who are as passionate about goal writing as I am, but let's just jump right in. We're tackling something that every occupational therapist, whether you're a new grad or a seasoned practitioner, has struggled with at some point, and that's goal writing. And we've all been there, like we were sitting at our computer and we're staring at our evaluation that we just completed and trying to come up with some, perfect, client-centered, measurable goals that checks all the boxes that we need to do. But instead, we just kind of like resort to the same old goal, cookie cutter goals that we've always done. Anybody else? I know I'm not the only one that's been in this boat, but that's definitely been me. And I kind of have this weird love for goal writing because I think it sets you up for a better plan of care and kind of helps you with interventions and treatment strategies and plans. But I remember I was like scrolling through that occupational therapy, what's it called? Treatment ideas and information Facebook group. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's just a Facebook group and it has like, I think like almost 70,000, OT practitioners and students like sharing resources and tips. And I was kind of like reading through, trying to see if I could help or, add some comments in here and there. And I came across a post from an OT who's frustrated about goal writing. And I was like, I'm writing this down because this is exactly the types of questions that people give me all the time about goal writing and like, how should we do this? And I will just, let me just read it to you. So it says, why is it so hard to write good goals beyond just ADLs? I feel like I'm writing the same things over and over. And half the time I'm just like worried that my goals won't get approved by insurance or they'll be denied, or does it even matter? Okay. Can you relate to that? Because I definitely can. And so that is one of the reasons why I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a great topic to talk about today. And we're going to kind of break it down and go through some of these things. But we're going to talk about why goal writing is one of the most essential parts of our job. It feels really cookie cutter, but like I said, we'll kind of go through on why it's essential to write good goals. Um, it's also an area of documentation that I feel that we do not put enough emphasis on. Um, we go on and on and on about documentation, which obviously is important. I mean, we all have our little cheat sheets, our little words, or making sure that we're skilled, that we are actually showing the skill that we are performing with our patients all the time. But there's so much emphasis there that we kind of forget about goals sometimes. And if we write really good, rock solid goals, actually documentation is so much easier. And then let's be honest, it could just be a total pain in the butt because those EMRs don't always make it easy. They have so many drop downs. Maybe they'll have like all these, you know, uh, you know, canned goals trying to make it easier for us as clinicians, but then we're like kind of like fighting and saying like, how can we make this goal the way we want it to, make it the words that we want it to say, to make it for client-centered for our patients. And they don't always make it easy. So, I mean, obviously there are barriers to writing good goals, but we can kind of like, go through some of those things today. So in this episode, we're going to look at why goal writing can be such a struggle, what you can do to make your goals more skilled, client-centered, collaborative with the patient, occupation-based. And then I'm going to go over some of my favorite tips and strategies that I use, and kind of like figure out what are some ways that we can make this really easy in our everyday practice. Okay. So if you ever feel like, like you're throwing spaghetti at the wall when it comes to goal writing, we're like, we can do this. Like, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Stick with me because by the end of this episode, you'll have a much clearer path forward. All right. So let's just start. Why is goal writing so hard sometimes? Like, what makes it so difficult? So, you talked about a little bit earlier is like the electronic medical record struggle. I sometimes feel like they are working against me instead of with me. Like, most EMR systems are designed, like I was saying, with like drop down menus. And I feel like they have sometimes good intentions. And I also feel like they're not really made for therapists in mind. Some are absolutely, but some are definitely not. Um, but in reality, they sometimes can limit your ability to customize those goals for your clients and their specific needs. And so I think those are the things that are hard because it's like on one hand, you have, your employer saying like, be client centered, make it quote occupation based or, like they have all these rules around it. Make sure your documentation reflects your skill. But then they have these EMR systems that make it like it feels just impossible sometimes. Um, I can think of like a few examples. Maybe we're writing goals for caregiver burden and they don't have an option for that. You know what I mean? Or maybe they'll be like, you want to be a little bit more specific and say your patient wants to do specific cooking tasks in order to transition from skilled nursing back home to her home environment. But maybe their drop downs or maybe their options are like, you know, um, patient can perform IADLs or something like that. And so you're trying to force a goal into something that you're trying to be a little bit more specific. And technically, right, we're working on IADLs with cooking. And so that is true, but it doesn't really capture the heart of what we're trying to work on and be very client centered. And sometimes people are like, well, why does that matter? Right. But if you really want to have a really good plan of care, we want to be specific, first of all. And then also like, we have to work on the things that our patients want and need to do in order to go home. And I mean, unless you have one clinician that's only working with that client and they know exactly what that goal means, I mean, I could be coming in PRN and have no idea what IADL I should be focusing on. I mean, as you know, this can be many, many, many things. And so those are the kinds of situations that kind of leave us like we're not capturing the whole story. So, okay, so what do we do about it? Those are the things that I really like. Like, okay, there's only so much we can do sometimes, but these are some tips that I've come up with that we can kind of address. So, when your EMR limits you, you can sometimes they'll have like an other or a custom field available. You'll have all these drop downs and like sometimes in the software it'll say like other or custom, and then you can write out the occupation you're addressing to make sure that the documentation, reflects that outcome that we're trying to actually accomplish with our patient. Another thing is like when using drop downs, you can do things like add specific clarifications in your notes to justify the goal if it doesn't perfectly align with those systems presets. It's like we always talk about like, if you don't document, it doesn't happen. So if like we're trying to write a goal on cooking and they don't have that, and you have to put IADLs, make sure that's justified in your documentation or explain. I guess there's a better term of explain what you're doing in your documentation, to understand, to paint that picture we talk about, when it comes to goals and evaluations and documentation for our patients. Okay. Number 2. There are so many goal writing methods. So this is always kind of an interesting thing. Talk about, different frameworks. So a lot of us learn frameworks in school. You have like SMART and you have RHUMBA and COAST. And it doesn't really actually matter which one you use. I learned SMART when I was in school many, many years ago, but I actually have transitioned to Coast, and Coast is the one that I like the best. And Coast is the one that I use. Basically because it breaks everything down into clear, manageable pieces. I feel like it's very occupation centered. So, quick refresher, or if you're new to Coast goals, Coast stands for Client Occupation Assist Level Specific and Time Bound. I feel like Coast goals are made for OTs. Um, but from my experience and talking to a lot of people, most people don't learn Coast goals. But I just feel like you can't get more occupational therapy than Coast goals. So that's why I use Coast goals, and that's why I teach them, teach Coast goals. But that doesn't mean that you can't use any of them. There's no rules and regulations from Medicare or insurance companies or anything um, on what types of goals you are writing, as long as they're clear and measurable and client centered. That's kind of like the biggest things that we have to kind of focus on. Um, So again, let's be practical. I always like the practical tips. So what do we do about this? So pick a method that feels natural to you. So if you really struggle with SMART goals for whatever reason, and you're like, I just don't, you're not adding all the bits and pieces that you need to in there to make clear goals, you know, just try another one. Use it consistently. See what becomes, second nature and kind of just works for you. So, like when we're talking about those, when we're talking about goals, like we see all sorts of goals being written by all sorts of people. Everybody has their own style. Like some people get a little bit more wordy, some people are a little bit more, cut and dry or cookie cutter or to the point. Um, I I do true coast goals, and I'll give you a couple examples of a not so great goal and a good goal and why it even matters. Okay, so you have like a not so great goal. That could be within 2 weeks, the patient will perform upper body dressing independently with adaptive equipment while sitting edge of bed with good dynamic sitting balance. Okay, is that a goal that I've seen people write? Yes, I wrote that as an example because I saw someone write that goal and I was just like, there are too many things. Um, but we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. I think a better goal would be something like within 2 weeks, the patient will perform upper body dressing independently with good dynamic sitting balance. So, what's the difference? Or do you see the difference or hear the difference? I guess. The second one is clearer, it's less restrictive, and it's easier to measure. So, like the first one has way too many things to measure. Okay. So, like, in order to meet that goal, not only do they have to do it within 2 weeks, they have to upper body dress independently, right? And they have to use an adaptive equipment, and they have to do it at sitting at the edge of the bed, and they have to do it with a good sitting balance. Like that is a lot of things to measure. So like if a patient meets, I don't know, let's say there's 4 things in there that are measured. Let's say they meet 3 of the 4, they don't meet the goal. Yes, you can rewrite the goal. Yes, you can modify the goal. But like we're trying to put more work up in the front end to make it easier in the back end. We have enough documentation. Why are we making goals harder than they need to be? Why, and modifying goals if it's not necessary? Sometimes obviously things change and we have to modify goals. But like, if you stick to a format for goal writing, you'll hit all the things you need to without doing too much, right? Or too little. Okay. We also sometimes forget that we can use outcome measures in our goals if necessary. Um, and I get it, right? Like if you're juggling a full caseload, you are time crunched, including something like an outcome measure can feel like it's just one more thing on your already overwhelming to-do list. There's not enough time to go to the bathroom, let alone adding more to our plate. But I'm telling you that specifically for the goals that are very hard to quantify or measure, adding an outcome measure can give us objective data that not only shows the client process, but also like justifies medical necessity, um, and, helps that patient achieve goals. And that feels really good to patients. I can think of an example. I was working in home health, and the client had a chronic severe stroke many years, and they had, their spouse was the caregiver. They had been in the hospital and they're returning home. So, like, in general, the patient's functional ability was kind of like status quo. And they had us go in there and do an evaluation, and we kind of were going over things. Um, but the caregiver was just feeling completely overwhelmed. I remember them saying that they were in burnout. It was just like, how can what are some things that we can do with that? Like, how do we write goals for our patient? Um, how do we address caregiver burden? Because that can be a primary goal. And these types of goals were, and sometimes I think, really difficult to write. But if you use things like objective measures, assessments to quantify something like caregiver burden, and that can be super helpful and useful. So if you use something along the lines of maybe like caregiver self-assessment questionnaire, I should add that. I'll add that into the show notes. So can grab that. Um, self-assessment. Something like that, it would be really valuable because it gives insight into the caregiver's like emotional and physical strain. We can quantify what we're trying to achieve instead of just saying the caregiver feels less burdened. The caregiver, you know what I mean? Like, how do you write these types of goals? So, based on the results of something like the caregiver self-assessment questionnaire, I was able to craft client-centered goals that supported, the caregiver. I mean, ultimately, the client and the caregiver. Like, we all know, because we look at things so holistically as occupational therapy practitioners, that it's not just the client. So an example of a long-term goal could be caregiver will report decreased stress levels as evidenced by a score of less than 5 out of 10 on the caregiver self-assessment assessment questionnaire, sorry, in order to improve quality of life within 4 weeks. Quality of life, reduction of burden of care are two things that, like, are completely justifiable. Obviously, it's within our scope of practice, but we kind of worry that we can't write goals around those things. But we absolutely can. So maybe an example, I mean, there's lots of things that you could write as short-term goals to help reduce that caregiver burden. A couple examples will be like caregiver will verbalize 3 strategies for reducing caregiver burden. Within 2 weeks, caregiver will demonstrate body mechanics independently in order to reduce risk of bodily injury associated with stress from performing transfers within 3 weeks. I mean, there's lots of different things depending, of course, on the circumstance. But it's like, how do we write a goal for something like stress or um, caregiver burden or quality of life? Like, how do you quantify that? How do you put a quote number on that? In some ways, I feel like you can't, right? But in order for us to help justify, continued services or have a measurable client-centered outcome measures can be really, really helpful. Are they appropriate for every single one person? No. But I think that they can be super helpful when we're really kind of like having a hard time with some of those goals. So by incorporating some of these tools like into my goal writing, I kind of saw and I was able to track, like I said, how the caregiver's progress was. But I also was able to really tailor interventions because, like, something like the caregiver self-assessment questionnaire, I could directly see exactly the areas that they were having trouble with. And then I'm like, okay, I can specifically address that. So that makes my plan of care so much easier. So instead of just being like, I don't know, like, how do I increase quality of life? How do I decrease burden of care? Like, you have those measurements to kind of help you guide your plan of care. It helps create a treatment strategy, interventions that is systematic and really is focusing on what the client needs. So, this approach ensures that the caregiver is supported and improving their overall care environment, which ultimately helps the client. And so, I really do love using those in my goal setting, in my documentation. Um, and so I just feel like it's such a great way to be clear on what we're trying to achieve. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times I've went in to see patients and you're like, I don't even, okay, what should I do with this patient today? What should I do with this patient today? Not because we don't have good creative ideas. I mean, we're OT practitioners. We have lots of ideas. But what can we do to really focus in and hone in on what the client is trying to achieve? And it focuses back to, it also helps us focus. Like if we're going back to those patients who are, you know, having a difficulty following their plan of care, quote, non-compliant, which I do not actually believe in non-compliance. I feel like there's always a why, and there's always maybe it's a choice that they don't want to participate in therapy. Maybe it's they're too tired. That there's lots of things that go into that. But if you're reviewing their goals and they're these vague goals and they're yeah, I guess I'm working on IADLs, that feels very different than saying oh, you told me you want to we're working on cooking in order to return home. And they're yes. So I feel like there's a lot of different reasons why goals matter. And kind of maybe just clarifying a little bit more on how I um view or look at things like goals is sometimes I feel like people just write all the goals, long and short-term goals are all kind of kind of the same. They're all maybe you'll throw in a strength goal, maybe you'll throw in this, you throw in that. Okay. So how I really think there's just this blurred line sometimes between long and short-term goals. And how I view long and short-term goals is long-term goals are the big picture. They're going to be occupation based. Almost, I'm trying to think of an example, but all my goals are occupation based because that's what we're working towards. These are the things that the patient wants and needs to do, right? We're working on toileting independently. We're working on cooking a meal modified independently. We're working, those are the things that the patient cares about. To be honest, insurance companies do not care at all about the patient increase their strength from 4 to 5. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they increase the strength from 4 to 5. Would I put that in a short-term goal? Absolutely, because maybe that's something that we really need to work on in order to achieve that long-term occupation-based goal. But those aren't the things insurance companies care about. Those aren't the things that patients care about. They care about the things that they are doing on their day-to-day basis. So all of my long-term goals, I should never say all, and I never should say always, right? But okay, in general, my long-term goals are going to be occupation-based. And then the short-term goals are just the stepping stones to get us there. So if you can be focusing on body functions like strength, like range of motion, you know, things like that. But it also can be occupation-based short-term goals as well. So let's kind of I guess, go through an example that might be a little bit more clear. If the patient's long-term goal was to dress themselves independently, let's say, but to get there, we could have all sorts of short-term goals like improving shoulder flexion to 120 degrees to don a shirt, increase dynamic sitting balance to Fair Plus to perform lower body dressing. We can go into those body functions, performance components, whatever you want to call them. But also we can work on dressing. Lower body dressing is a component of that long-term goal. So each of those short-term goals is a measurable step towards achieving that big picture occupation-based goal. So a couple little tips. Again, I like to be really practical. So like I said, think of those short-term goals as building blocks that lead to the success of the long-term occupation-based goal. And then when you're stuck, if you write good goals in the first place, if you're trying to figure out interventions, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do, like really think about what's the next small step this client needs to take in order to achieve their long-term goal. Like you're like, okay, the patient's working on cooking. You're like, I don't know. What should I mean, besides cooking, you're not going to be cooking every single time for your interventions, but you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to work on sequencing. Maybe I need to work on standing tolerance because they need to be able to stand longer at the counter. Maybe I need to, it really comes down to activity analysis, which is our forte, but really kind of like digging into those activity analysis skills, which do come more naturally with more experience. Absolutely. Um, but just kind of figuring out like what are their strengths and limitations and like what do we need to do to achieve that long-term goal? One other area that is kind of like I kind of also kind of get this as in like I get why we don't always do this, but truthfully, the bottom line is that we should not set goals on skills that we did not evaluate. And this one's a biggie because I know we do this all the time, right? So really, if you're going to have it like picked apart, like we should not be setting goals for something you didn't assess, period, right? Like we didn't assess it. How can we write goals? How do we know where they're starting from? We didn't assess the ability to perform a task, so you shouldn't be writing a goal about it. Sometimes I do think that you can justify saying like, okay, I can kind of, determine what their ability is going to be by other tasks that we have them participate in during the evaluation. Yeah, I do understand that. But you do have to document that and you do have to paint that picture for somebody that is picking your documentation, goal writing, evaluations apart, or someone else that's coming in and a PRN therapist and another therapist takes over and is like, oh, showering. And you're like, I don't even know where they're starting from. Like their goal is, modified independent with adaptive equipment, but like no one's ever showered them before. I don't know. So, you know what I mean? Like it gets to be a little bit gray. Um, and so those are the kind of scenarios that you have to kind of think about. If there's zero documentation about assessing something like a client's IADLs and you have all these goals about IADLs, like where do you start if you don't know where they currently are? Doesn't mean I haven't jumped in as a PRN therapist and said like, all right, let's do a quick assessment or let's figure this out. Absolutely. But you just kind of start thinking about the big picture and what we need to do. So making sure that your goals are grounded in your evaluation findings. Um, and that you're writing goals that are important, that are, if they're not assessed, you can add it as an observation during the treatment. Like I said, you can update the goals as needed. Those are all things that we can do to make that a little bit easier and more clear. But yeah, we've seen it throughout the years and it just makes it hard. So we covered a lot today and just doing a quick recap. Goal writing is hard because of the EMR limitations. The frameworks, maybe we don't know how to write for outcome measures. We can always make our goals stronger by choosing a framework that works for you and having those measurable outcomes. And remember, don't write goals for things you didn't assess. Um, if you're really looking for more information and really trying to get more examples and a goal bank and really nailing down how to write good goals and take those to the next level to help with your plan of care, I got you covered. I have the second edition of the Mastering OT Guide or Goal Writing, the Ultimate Guide and Goal Bank for Adult Rehab. This applies to any setting. Um, Drops next week, so the week of March 24th, and depending on when you're listening to this, it may be out. I'm so excited about this because this is an updated version from one that was done a long, long time ago. It's going to be much easier to use, user friendly. Also, though, one thing I'm really excited about is that we'll have a lot of outcome measures. We'll go step by step into goal writing tons of goal examples for different settings and different parts, different types of patients. Um, and a goal bank, like for quick reference. It's not all inclusive. It just kind of gets your mind going on how you can think about goal writing. The other thing that I really, really love about it is that it follows in the OTPF4. So the most recent OTPF, the Occupational Therapy Practice and Framework, so it follows all the language, it follows all the new and updated information like health information and that kind of thing. So it really is a comprehensive guide of not only learning how to write good goals, um, but lots of examples, diagnoses, maintenance therapy, progressive diseases, and a lot of those ones that are really hard and tricky. Gives you tons of examples and ways to write those goals. So thank you for listening today. If this episode was helpful, please subscribe, leave a review. We need these reviews to progress and promote our podcasts, and share it with your OT friends. I'm excited to share with you the ebook launch the week of March 24th, or I'll put the link in when it's live and you can grab it if it's something that you think would be helpful in your practice. And let me know if you have any questions about goal writing. I love it. I love it. All right. See you next time.